let's get going. So I'll introduce myself, just so you know why what I say might be of interest and might be useful. I'd like to provide some recent history for both Democrats and Republicans. Neil's covered some of this, but I'd like to highlight different aspects. Then I'd like to move forward, looking forward with both parties. I'd like to talk about what Europe's role could be, a productive role to really incentivize the United States to greater ambition. And then let's have a discussion. So let's begin. Who is this guy? So this is me. From 2008 to 2013, I was finishing my PhD focused on climate. You can see me here. This is on a research vessel in the Indian Ocean. I founded Citizens Climate Lobby chapter number 5 or 6. So it's really, I was there from the very beginning, and we only had about 100 people, not 200,000, as Neil's mentioned. I wrote several position papers for the organization as a volunteer, and I had 75 meetings with congressional staff, lobby meetings. So this was how I got hired. And then I joined the staff in 2013. I recently left just in September. I founded the DC office for Citizens Climate Lobby. This picture of me holding my bike up in front of the Capitol. I raised the money to pay for 1 year's rent of office by riding my bike from New York to DC, 300 miles with 3 other people. And we raised enough money to buy the office. So that's why I'm showing this. It was just me at the beginning. I grew to manage 10 people in DC. And my role at CCL was as our chief political strategist and lobbying instructor for those 200,000 plus people. And one thing that I did that provided me with a very useful perspective on both Democrats and Republicans, every June, I analyzed 400 to 500 meeting notes from the constituents. So our volunteers, they would take notes. I analyzed them for over 70 different topics that might be brought up by the congressional staff or the members. And then I shared that back with members of Congress. Also on staff, I worked with paid lobbyists, contract lobbyists, as well as my staff to get an insider's view. So congressional offices will say different things. They'll behave differently to constituents as they will to professional lobbyists. And hiring the paid lobbyists, the contract lobbyists, that enabled us to speak to higher ranking members of the office. So the chief of staff, the legislative director, as opposed to the legislative assistant, who was the most common person, our volunteers, the constituents would meet with. I helped pass several bills into law in my tenure. This is me, not at a bill passage, but at the introduction of a bill in front of the Capitol. And what I was able to do is integrate constituent and insider views, those volunteers, as well as those lobbyists who worked for me and who we paid, to get an unusually complete view of US politics on the climate issue. So that's why you might want to listen to me. That's why I might have something interesting to say. So let's cover recent history and to inform the expectations for the coming midterm. For Democrats, I'll cover in more detail, but they just passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and you've certainly heard a bit about that from Niels. You have seen a continued regulatory push. President Biden using existing authority to pass regulations, and you've seen the Democrats avoiding mention of the Green New Deal. So Niels mentioned how this was a really important element in US politics, and that is certainly true. It is interesting, therefore, to see many Democrats avoiding that in recent years. And for Republicans, they are positioning themselves as being interested in climate. Republican elites, elected politicians, this is a marked shift in recent years, and they are actually voting for climate legislation. This is also a marked shift in recent years. And they are still attacking the Democratic approach to climate. This is not so much of a shift, but the way in which they attack it is different. They're not attacking the idea that it's good to act, they're attacking the way they act. So that is a significant shift. So let's look a little more closely at each of these. For Democrats with the Inflation Reduction Act, except for a methane fee it is basically all spending. So it's the United States spending a lot of money, investing a lot of money in reducing emissions. This is great, but it's only part of the picture. 369 billion in spending plus 250 billion in loan authority. If I was reading it right, Niels, you had slightly different numbers, but they were very close. This is expected to reduce emissions about 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. And the United States commitment is 50%, 50% below 2005 levels by 2050. And when you add this all up, in the United States, we use the analogy of carrots and sticks. If you imagine you're on a horse, you use a carrot to incentivize the horse to move forward, use a stick to whap the horse and make it go forward. This is all carrot, except for that methane fee. This is all incentive, and I would like to see some more stick. And I think that we need that a penalty, some sort of penalty, to really get that last 10% of emissions reductions. I think that's where Democrats are. It's just politically difficult for Democrats to accomplish that. A regulatory approach, this is the approach used by the Obama administration, and it has been continued by President Biden. However, there have been changes in the Supreme Court and recent rulings that the Supreme Court has made that make it difficult to have much faith in this approach. So this is a bit of dissonance. You see the environmental movement as a whole really emphasizing a regulatory approach, but I find it difficult to believe that this is going to work, because when you look at how regulations are implemented, there's a mandatory comment period, and in the United States we are very litigious, and so there are a lot of lawsuits. And lawsuits can delay the implementation of regulations. So you're looking at anywhere from 2 years to 10 years from when a regulatory rule is first proposed to when it actually is implemented. There are examples where it goes longer. So a regulatory approach, Democrats are continuing to pursue it. I just don't have much faith in it. I don't think it's I think it needs to be done, but I think that has been overemphasized. And then there is the Green New Deal. I want to point out that this was never legislation that would do anything. The Green New Deal, as proposed, was just a resolution. So if it were passed, then it would have been the sense of the United States Congress that a Green New Deal should be passed. It was never articulated in any detail that would actually accomplish emissions reduction. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize about the Green New Deal. It has become a liability for Democrats. So here, this is an article after the last election in 2020, when Abigail Spanberger, she's a Democrat, relatively moderate Democrat from Virginia, who said that the reason the Democrats did not take more seats in the House was because of the Green New Deal and because of the defund the police mantra that had become such a part of more liberal Democrats' positions. And so she was saying that Democrats have positioned themselves as socialists, and that's a big problem. And Republicans, as proof of this, I think that today in American politics, you hear Republicans mention Green New Deal more than Democrats. So the Green New Deal was never legislation. It never would have never achieved a manifestation that would have accomplished anything. It has become a liability for Democrats, an electoral liability, and proof of that is that Republicans mention it more than Democrats. So my expectation moving forward for Democrats is that they will try to coast off the success of the Inflation Reduction Act for some time. The majority of Democrats will not try to do anything big on climate for some time for fear of electoral consequences. They will rely on regulations. They will try to talk up the success of the IRA. I think that Democrats are going to be timid. Like I said, continue a regulatory approach. They will ignore the obvious shortcomings. And I think that a few of the most dedicated climate champions in Congress, Democrats, will try to move bipartisan legislation forward. But I expect this to be a relatively small number. With the increasing polarization in the United States that Niels also spoke about, It's unfortunately unpopular for Democrats to work with Republicans to really work with them. And I think it's crazy, but I also think that that's what you see in American politics. So now let's talk about the Republicans. First of all, messaging. This is a more interesting history. In 2015, you had the Gibson resolution, which was a resolution like the Green New Deal, wouldn't have accomplished anything real. It just said climate change is real, humans have had an impact, and Congress should do something about it. So a really low bar, very unambitious. But at the time, this was a really big deal. This was 7 years after John McCain, the quote that Niels shared. In that 7 years, there was a big retreat by the Republican Party away from climate action. And so even this, to get 11 Republicans and then 17 Republicans to say climate change is real, humans have an impact, and Congress should do something about it, that was a big deal. And then in 2016, you have the House Climate Solutions Caucus, which was founded. And this grew to include 45 Democrats and 45 Republicans by 2020. This was also a really big deal. To get that many Republicans saying we want to work with Democrats, that was very positive. Niels mentioned the foundation of a Senate Climate Solutions Caucus. This is also wonderful. In 2020, you have the Conservative Climate Caucus, which was founded. So no Democrats, just Republicans, up to 78 saying Republicans should act on climate. This is a huge shift in just 5 years from Republicans saying climate change is real, humans have had an impact, and Congress should do something about it. These Republicans are saying, well, let's do something about it. This is a really big shift. In January of 2020, Leader Kevin McCarthy, he's the highest ranking Republican in the House right now. We assume that he will be the Speaker of the House should Republicans retake the House, which is the most likely outcome of this midterm. The first all Republican meeting of the new Congress was focused on climate. So this is a very strong signal from the leadership, the highest ranking Republican in the House, that climate is something Republicans should be focusing on. Huge shift. And then in June of 2021, this same leader, McCarthy, rushes the announcement of a Republican plan on climate. He rushed it because he thinks that Republicans are going to do better in their elections if they can talk about climate. So I think this is all messaging. This is not about action, but I think it's all very positive. You see a shift in what is possible for Republicans to be for and still be considered good Republicans. Very significant. They're also acting. And so Niels mentioned these, but in December of 2020, President Trump signs into law the third COVID relief package. It includes climate action on battery technology, carbon capture, marine fisheries, and hydrofluorocarbons. In December of 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure package is the largest investment to date, to that date, at $110 billion. So the Inflation Reduction Act basically tripled this in terms of investments. You have 19 Republicans who vote for it. That includes Senator Mitch McConnell, who is the highest ranking Republican in the Senate. So you have the highest ranking Republican in the Senate voting for something. You have the highest ranking Republican in the House sending strong signals of climate action. This is wonderful. And then in 2021, the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which focuses on agriculture, passes the Senate 92-8. To me, in the United States context, this was shocking. You actually had more Democrats who voted against this than Republicans. You had 5 Democrats who voted against this, only 3 Republicans. But you have a bill with climate solutions in the title is so different from 2015. It's just a very different politics in which we're operating in. And you've also seen very public interest in the past year from in a carbon border adjustment mechanism, or CBAM, from Republican senators. This is also very significant, especially if you're interested in those sticks, policies that have a penalty for emitting greenhouse gases. And so my expectation is that Republicans will continue to talk and act on climate, but they won't lead like Democrats do. It's going to be something that they do, but it's not going to be something they talk about very much on the campaign trail. And it will still take some time before the ambition of their policy aligns with the science. So Republicans are in a much better place than they were, but they still have further to go before the policies they're interested in are aligned with the science of what is necessary. And this is just an article talking about how Leader McCarthy rushed the launch of that platform. So now moving forward, I think there's some key questions. How will Republicans react to the Inflation Reduction Act? Will they treat it like Obamacare? So what I mean by that, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, President Obama's signature piece of legislation passed in 2010. Over the next decade, every Republican campaign saying this is terrible, this is the worst thing. They voted many times in the House to repeal it. They're ultimately not successful, but that was the animating issue for the Republican Party for over a decade. So Democrats passed the Inflation Reduction Act using the same parliamentary procedural as they used with Obamacare. Will the Republicans act in the same way? That's a huge question. I think the answer is no. I don't think it'll be the same, but it could be wrong. And I'd be happy to discuss that more. Here's another key question. Where can Democrats and Republicans find common ground? Those small group of Democrats who are interested in working on bipartisan solutions, where do they overlap with Republicans? I think permitting reform might be one to actually make fewer regulations or make the regulations better. One of the big problems we have in the United States, because there's so many lawsuits, you actually have environmental groups who are stopping the siting of transmission lines of renewable projects for other environmental concerns other than the climate. And so I think that Democrats and Republicans might be able to get together on that issue to find common ground. And CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, that is the capturing of carbon dioxide from a power plant and putting it underground, or capturing it directly from the atmosphere. I think that there can be some more agreement on that issue with Democrats and Republicans. And here's another big question. What will the rest of the world do on climate, and how will that affect American politics? I was able to read some of the comments and pointing out that the United States is the largest industrial country right now. Well, we are being impacted by the rest of the world. We are not a monolith. And I think that you're seeing that more these days. And on climate, particularly with the CBAM, and particularly with the European Union CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, on the EU ETS. I think that that is why discussions of the EU putting that CBAM on the existing carbon price, that is why you were seeing those Republican senators express so much interest in this in the United States. So the United States is listening to what the rest of the world is doing. We are paying attention. And I do think that when a price is demanded, when American manufacturing goods are going to have to pay their carbon price, pay for their carbon emissions, I think that's the best way to influence American politicians. So I've alluded to this. How can Europe help? I think number one, continue along the path that Europe already has for putting a CBAM on the European emissions trading system. I think that that has already done more to get Republican interest in carbon pricing than anything else. Please keep it up. Number two, don't accept US regulatory equivalence. I think that President Biden is going to say, hey, we're spending all this money and look at these regulations that I am helping to write that are going to reduce our emissions reductions. Because of the Supreme Court makeup, because of the legislation, because of the lawsuits, I just don't think it's worth much. And so I don't think European countries should accept a trade of US regulations for an explicit price on carbon, for example. It just, what one president can do without Congress, the next president can undo without Congress. And so regulations are something that are within the administrative branch. The executive branch, they can be done and undone very quickly. I just don't think they're worth much. So please don't accept that. And number three, be tough on Russia. This is the other issue that I haven't spoken about at all. But I think that for Russia to be able to sell fossil fuels, continue to be able to sell fossil fuels, I think that that's a big problem, not just for the war, but for climate change. And so I've been pleased from my view with the world response overall to Russia. I think that it's I don't see the United States going back to buying Russian gas. So I think that we want to. It'd be great if we can continue to have a unified front there. So those would be my what I would like to see from Europe. And let's have time for questions.